Hello, and thanks for watching another edition of ARFCOM News. This week, I want to tell you about the Texas legislator trying to ban private sales of firearms, a Florida bill that would require background checks for ammo, and the lawsuit Felon Armory filed to protect their patent on binary triggers, plus lots more. But before we get started, I want to tell you about the fine barrel-aged single malt night vision products offered to you by our friends at tnvc.com, just like Mom used to make. If you like seeing stuff more than not seeing stuff, take a look at our sponsor, tnvc.com, your source for quality night vision gear to make you the bump in the night. Before we get started, I have some news about ARFCOM to report in this edition of ARFCOM News. Paul and I spent the weekend at Cowtown Range here in Phoenix shooting some product review videos, which will be headed your way with the quickness. But while we were there, we barely survived a dinosaur attack.
What the shit?
Okay, so let's get this party started with Devon Harley, who seems like a real stand-up kind of guy. New Jersey police officers say they responded to an argument in an apartment complex when Harley took off running and tossed a handgun which had an Auto Sear installed. The DOJ press release isn't specific about what kind of handgun, but it mentioned the 31-round magazine only had 22 rounds of ammo in it. I guess the ammo shortage is hard on dirtbags too. There is an awful lot of room to speculate, but it's probably a fair bet it was a Glock with an Auto Sear from Wish.com or some other Fugazi site like that.
Yeah, Fugazi, it's a wazi, it's a woozy, it's a...
Harley was a convicted felon because, of course he was, so he wasn't allowed to have the handgun in the first place. And that demonstrates both the futility of gun laws in general and the cobra farming effect that often crops up with draconian restrictions. Don't get me wrong, I believe that once a man has served his sentence, he should be able to vote, carry a gun, and get a job without the ever-present specter of a former conviction haunting him. But our society seems to favor policies which create a permanent lower caste for anyone who has been convicted of a crime. Still, the law was no obstacle for Harley in regard to obtaining a gun, and if it's illegal to have a gun at all, may as well get your money's worth and rock a full auto. The really fun part is that while Harley could be charged with all sorts of fun stuff like evading arrest and felon in possession of a firearm, he can't be charged with failing to register an NFA device because attempting to register it would amount to self-incrimination in the context of the Fifth Amendment. In other news, a self-important autocrat vetoed legislation that would have limited his power. Pennsylvania law allows the governor to suspend gun sales and prohibit open carry by declaring an emergency. The state legislature passed a pair of bills which would have removed that power while leaving other emergency powers intact, but Governor Tom Wolf vetoed both of them because politicians never let go of power once they get it. Should governors have the authority to rally guardsmen and appropriate funding to respond to emergencies? Definitely. Should governors be allowed to unilaterally dictate where people may go or what they may do during an emergency which stretches on for months with no end in sight? Shall we allow governments to disregard statute and the Constitution simply because they declare an emergency? Why not let them indefinitely suspend elections and dissolve the legislature while we're at it? I think emergency powers were designed for things like wildfires and tornadoes. Emergencies which come to an end. It seems as though every would-be dictator in the world is using the pandemic as an excuse to grant themselves authority over everything for all time. We really need to sit down and have some serious discussions about what administrative tasks we want executives to be able to do without the legislative branch and for how long. I think the answer maybe needs to involve a regular referendum from the legislature at the very least. If you agree that Governor Wolf is a self-important autocrat and you want to tell him yourself, pause this video and give him a call at 717-772-8284. Ask him if he believes there should be any limit at all on his emergency powers. Ask him how long he plans to maintain his death grip on the dictatorial powers he enjoys. Or send him a lump of coal at the address on the screen. If you're thinking he doesn't care what you think, I want you to understand the only things politicians really care about are control and their reputation. Will Tommy change his policy just because of a few phone calls and letters? Of course not. But constant pressure and reminders do have a cumulative influence on their actions, especially from their own party. So tell him you're a registered Democrat and intend to vote against him in the next primary. It's that time of year again. Yep, it's time for the control freaks to refile all their failed plans from last year to oppress the people. Representative Dan Daley has been trying to pass a bill which would require background checks for ammo, which he named after a Parkland victim. As you're likely aware, the Parkland shooter passed background checks to buy his guns and therefore would have been able to buy ammo as well, but that can't stop Daley from dancing in the blood of victims in order to impose his will on the people of Florida. He's also totally unconcerned about the embarrassingly abject failure of a similar bill in California. There are a lot of problems with bills like these, but one of the biggest issues is how the National Instant Criminal Background Check System isn't intended to be used for ammo purchases. More to the point, NICS cannot be used for that purpose. So to run the background checks, states have to implement their own expensive and fundamentally flawed database. California's system checked over 345,000 people for ammo purchases and denied 62,000 of them because they hadn't been entered into the system yet, or there were discrepancies like the spelling of their street name. Only 101 people were actually denied for being a prohibited possessor, and given the state's track record, I'm betting many of those were in error. I really think control freaks are well aware of how ineffectual and burdensome these laws would be. I honestly believe legislators on both sides of the aisle and their supporters often advocate for restrictive laws simply because they wish to make things hard on the people they view as the other. Daley knows his bill wouldn't stop any crime, but he also knows it would be an enormous pain in the ass for gun owners, who are historically less likely to be Democrat. This sort of thing is extremely toxic and may come around to bite him, considering how many brand new Democrat gun owners we've picked up in the last year. If current trends continue, gun control isn't going to remain a partisan issue for much longer. If you want to tell Dan Daley you think he's a Melvin Supreme and he needs to stop being such a loser, call him at 850-717-5097. Tell him the bill is awful, tell him it is expensive and overly burdensome and won't save any lives. Tell him you plan to vote against him in the next primary. For some reason, people still seem to think Texas is the Wild West and some kind of firearm promised land. But out here in Arizona, I know we're a full state wester than they are, and we're also a lot more free. The gun freedom gap could get a little wider too. State Representative Lena Ortega from the West Texas town of El Paso is trying to pass a bill banning private sales of firearms. HB 118 basically makes it illegal for anyone to transfer a gun to someone who isn't a close relative without taking it to a dealer for a background check. There are some exceptions, of course, as there always are with this sort of thing. It will remain legal to transfer a firearm without a background check if the buyer is an FFL holder, has a carry permit, or is a police officer, of course. Why are police never expected to obey the same laws which govern the rest of us? I have to admit, as these things go, this one is less bad. The exemptions for family and carry permit holders should cover a lot of ground, making the law less onerous in practice, but it's still an infringement and still adds more records to the de facto gun registry represented by ATF Forms 4473. So please pause this video and call 512-473-2447 and ask to speak with your representative. Or, I don't know, pick one. Tell them to oppose Ortega's bill because it is restrictive and will have no effect on crime. Tell them to amend the bill to allow for voluntary, anonymous background checks. A seller ought to be able to access the NICS system on a website and obtain a simple go, no-go by entering the buyer's information. If anyone can run a check against any other person, even if it isn't for a gun sale, There's no way to use the system as a backdoor for gun registration. You already can run a detailed background check against anyone you want if you subscribe to one of the various services, but the NICS system is funded by our tax dollars. Why shouldn't we have access to it? Gun industry news. This week I'd like to kick off our gun industry news segment with a lawsuit filed by Franklin Armory against In the Field Defense. Franklin issued a press release stating they attempted to resolve the matter informally before sending cease and desist letters, but In the Field continued to manufacture a product which Franklin believes infringes on their patent for a binary trigger system. Franklin says they had little choice in filing a suit because their intellectual property is licensed to other parties. To my entirely inexpert eye, these two sears do look different, but I think the physical interaction of the surfaces matters a lot more than appearance for a patent. Franklin's binary trigger system has a 3-position selector switch where the positions are safe, normal, semi-auto, and a binary mode in which the trigger fires when pulled as well as released. Because the ATF considers release to be a function of the trigger, it does not violate the NFA. But because it does enable a person to shoot faster than normal, it may not be legal in certain states. I took a look at the website for In the Field Defense, and the first thing that pops out is the photocopied logo on their homepage. That's rad. The second thing that pops out is this statement stating they have stopped making and selling their multi-trigger system. I've been reporting for months about the record gun sales this year. Smith & Wesson reported almost 120% increase in sales for the second quarter this year versus the second quarter last year. Long gun sales, which includes the M&P line of ARs, more than doubled in comparison to last year, while handgun sales were only about 100% higher. All told, net sales produced almost $250 million, which left Smith & Wesson with $55.5 million on hand and no debt, which enabled them to hire 287 people at a time when many other companies have been forced to lay off employees. I'm rich, bitch! Industry-wide, gun sales have set records every month this year, so it shouldn't surprise anyone November straight demolished gun sales records for previous Novembers. The National Shooting Sports Foundation reports nearly 2 million background checks were reported by the FBI's National Instant Criminal Background Check System in November. This figure is not the actual number of guns purchased because only one check is performed regardless of the number of guns transferred, and it does not reflect private transfers or purchases from dealers where a carry permit or firearms owner's ID card is used in lieu of an instant check, so the actual number of guns bought was well in excess of 2 million. But these numbers do provide a general finger on the pulse of gun buying activity. With 1 month left to go, Americans have already purchased 19.1 million guns. That's already 22% more than the previous record set in 2016, and like I said, that's just comparing 11 months of sales in 2020 to the full 12 months of sales in 2016. The NSSF estimates about 40% of sales are going to new gun owners, making more than 7.5 million brand new gun owners. That's about 2.3% of the entire population of the US, or 4.8% of the number of eligible voters. Now, I'm not implying all gun owners think alike or should vote the same. I am telling you an enormous segment of the population is suddenly more aware of the laws regulating gun buying, technical details about how guns actually work, and are just generally more knowledgeable about guns than they were a year ago. Authoritarian control freaks rely on ignorance and disinformation to push their oppressive policies, and that's going to be a lot harder to get away with. Hoplophobes might still try to push their agenda, but if enough of these new gun owners are Democrats, those draconian policies could blow up in their face. The word iconic gets thrown around a lot in the gun industry, and in my not too humble opinion is grossly overused, but I don't think it's inaccurate to describe the CZ75 as iconic. It combined some of the best features of guns designed by John Moses Browning, peace be upon him, with features from Warsaw Pact guns and innovations new to the CZ75 back then. It features a low bore axis, excellent double action single action trigger system, slim, comfortable grip, and an impressive capacity for the 70s when it was introduced. If you want one today, the MSRP is $700. You can get an EAA Witness, which is a pretty decent copy of the design, for a little less, but now SAR USA has announced they are importing the SAR 2000. The SAR 2000 is a Turkish copy of the CZ75 made by SAR Silmez. The MSRP is $477 for the blued version and $500 for the stainless. Well, friends, that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoy watching these things because I sure like making them for you. If you want to help us keep bringing you banger content like this, please support the folks who support us. Not only does TNVC.com carry a wide selection of low-carb, fat-free, non-GMO night vision products, they also have mounts, lights, and all sorts of other gear to make you the bump in the night. And if you want to support us more directly, you can buy fly shirts like this one in our Teespring store. Or if you'd like to try your luck and see if you can win your choice of rad shirt from our Teespring store, post a comment containing the phrase, "Best $1.80 I ever spent" in the YouTube comments, and I will arbitrarily and unilaterally choose the best one. I love you. Industry news. Industry news. Boom.